So good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. We're looking forward to a good workshop. It is now about 9:32, so we can go ahead and get started. Quick disclaimer, this workshop is being recorded, and by joining, you agree to be recorded. Welcome to the Department of Toxic Substances Control's public workshop on hydrofluoric acid. My name is Charlie Liu, and I am a public participation specialist with the Department of Toxic Substances Control, which we will refer to as DTSC throughout this workshop. I will be facilitating this workshop today, and I want to begin by thanking you for taking the time to join us today. The workshop is scheduled from 9:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. The purpose of today's workshop is to present information on DTSC's proposal to regulate cleaning products containing hydrofluoric acid. We will also be taking feedback, questions, and comments received during the public comment period into consideration as we move forward in our process. We may end early if all questions have been addressed and comments have been heard. Next slide, please. Some housekeeping items here. If you like or need subtitles for today's workshop, please click on the CC closed captions icon at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen to enable closed captions. Also, when you get a chance, please open your chat box. Periodically throughout the workshop, we will be providing links and information in the chat box. You will not be able to send any chat messages in your chat box. This function is only limited to the panelists today. In this workshop, you are in a view and listen only role. Today, we will be taking questions and comments through the Q&A feature. During the Q&A session, please click on the Q&A button on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen to send your questions. You may send your questions at any point throughout the workshop, and we will respond during the Q&A session at the end of our presentation. You may send as many questions as you want. However, we request that you send one question at a time so we are able to respond to them adequately. We will do our best to respond to the questions in the order they are received. We will also have a public comment session immediately following our Q&A session. The session is only for comments regarding the proposal. Our panelists will not be responding to the comments like the Q&A session. Again, please note we will not be taking questions or comments by chat function. If you prefer to speak your question or comment, you can utilize the raise hand function on the toolbar. The hand will raise up, and I will be calling on audience members in the order that the hands go up. I will prompt you to unmute, and then you can state your question or comment for the panel to hear. If you do so, I would ask that you please clearly state your name and affiliation. That really helps us in the transcript as we review. For those joining by phone, press *9 to raise your hand to let us know you have a question or comment. You will be called on and prompted to unmute yourself. We also encourage you to send your comments by email at saferconsumerproducts, saferconsumerproducts at dtsc.ca.gov or via our CalSafer website. And today's presentation will also be made available on our website approximately 2 weeks after this workshop today. Lastly, please know that we are hosting this workshop from different locations. We request that you bear with us if there's any time lag or other technical issues. We sincerely appreciate your patience, understanding, and cooperation in making this a successful workshop. Next slide, please. Currently, the public comment period is open. The comment period closes at 11:59 p.m. on December 19th, 2024. 2 QR codes are available on the slide here. One is for the draft product chemical profile for cleaning products containing hydrofluoric acid, and the other is for submitting comments through CalSafer. Again, please submit your comments no later than 11:59 on December 19th, 2024. Next slide, please. This is the agenda for today's workshop. First, we'll have opening remarks by our Deputy Director of our Safer Consumer Products Program, Robin Christensen. We will then have Ann Cooper Doherty, Senior Environmental Scientist, speak about the Safer Consumer Products Program overview. Next, we'll have Alyssa Demko, Environmental Scientist, present on the proposal to list cleaning products containing hydrofluoric acid as a priority product. And after the presentation, we will have a question and answer session to respond to your questions. This is the audience's opportunity and time to pose questions for the panel to respond to today. Then we will have the public comment session. The panel will not be responding to the comments received, but the comments will be compiled and we will be reviewing and considering them. And finally, we will have our closing remarks. Thank you to all our presenters for your time and dedication for being here as well. And with that said, please welcome Deputy Director Robin Christensen. Robin?
Thank you, Charlie. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's public workshop on SCP's proposal to regulate cleaning products containing hydrofluoric acid as a priority product. My name is Robin Christensen, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Safer Consumer Products Program, also known as the SCP program. We're thrilled to have so many participants here today, and we thank you for joining us in this critical public engagement process. Today, we are here to share our findings on the use of hydrofluoric acid in cleaning products captured in our product chemical profile, and to also hear from you. These public workshops are a vital part of our process, and they inform how we develop our regulatory proposals. Given the extreme hazards of hydrofluoric acid and in combination with the wide availability of alternatives, which you will hear more about shortly, we have opted to move relatively quickly in proposing this product chemical profile as a combination as a priority product. Since this is our first public engagement on the topic, we want to emphasize the importance of receiving feedback on this topic. It's crucial that we get your input, and we rely on this to fill in gaps to make sure that we get our regulatory proposal right. So things that you think that we may have missed or misunderstood, or if you have new information to share with us, this is your opportunity to tell us here. Today during the comment period and also through written comments as part of our open comment period through our CalSafer portal. I want to thank you all again for joining today's workshop. We look forward to your questions and comments after all the presentations. Our work is much better for your thoughts and input. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ann Cooper.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Robin. I'm Ann Cooper Doherty, and I wanted to give you an overview of the Safer Consumer Products Program, how we work, as well as our prioritization process. Next slide, please. So the Safer Consumer Products, or SCP framework, if you boil it all down, is essentially a four-step process. The first step is what we call our candidate chemicals list. This is essentially the menu of chemicals that we can potentially regulate. And this list is populated by chemicals that have been identified as a potential concern by certain authoritative bodies or by DTSC. So once we have that menu of chemicals, we move on to step 2. And this is where we evaluate these chemicals in the context of the products that they're used in. And at this point, we're researching product chemical combinations and prioritizing those that may cause harm based on our prioritization principles, and I'll go over those in just a minute. For product chemical combinations that we determine may cause harm, we then initiate the rulemaking process to list them as officially priority products. Once they are officially priority products through rulemaking, we move on to step 3, which is the alternatives analysis step. Now, the alternatives analysis is a manufacturer-led evaluation of alternatives to the chemical of concern that we've identified in step 2. And this alternatives analysis is a lengthy, really in-depth process that uses life cycle thinking to assess alternatives to that chemical as part of the product chemical combination. And the main overall goal of the alternatives analysis is to avoid regrettable substitutes. Manufacturers are the ones that complete this alternatives analysis. They submit the report to DTSC. After they've submitted that report, we move on to step 4, where DTSC has a wide range of regulatory responses that we can select from to mitigate the adverse impacts that may remain from the product based on the outcome of the alternatives analysis from step 3. So that's essentially our 4-step process. And of course, after the rulemaking goes into effect, compliance and enforcement is also occurring through steps 3 and 4. Next slide, please. So in the last slide, I mentioned our prioritization principles, and this comes in step 2. So to meet the requirements of our regulations, we have to show that any product chemical combination that we intend to list as a priority product meets both of these prioritization principles. So the first is that there are potential exposures to a candidate chemical in the product. And the second is that one or more of these exposures have the potential to contribute to or cause significant or widespread and adverse impacts. The key word here is the word potential. We are not doing, full blown at risk assessments. It's really more of a precautionary approach to looking for exposure and adverse impacts. Next step, please. So the process of evaluating whether product chemical combinations meets these prioritization principles is a really somewhat long, lengthy process. It involves this 6-step process that we've drawn out here. This typically includes an initial screening and public engagement. And this initial screening and public engagement is typically aimed at better understanding the chemical, the product category, the potential for adverse impacts. And after that engagement, we typically begin the research and writing process for what we call our profile. And that is the technical document that outlines the scientific basis for our eventual rulemaking for a priority product, which we then propose. In this particular instance with hydrofluoric acid and cleaning products, the pieces around understanding the chemical, the product, the adverse impacts were already pretty well understood. So we actually skipped, as Robin alluded to, that initial screening and public engagement and jumped right into researching and writing the profile, proposing the priority product. And so we're already at that holding the pre-rulemaking workshop phase. Here's where, of course, we get our feedback, which we're really excited to receive. We'll take that feedback, use it to refine our technical document, which we call our profile. After that, we'll move on to external scientific peer review before we initiate our rulemaking, at which point there will be additional opportunities for public feedback, which we certainly appreciate. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Alyssa Demko. Next slide, please. And she will go over the more of the technical information about this priority product. Alyssa.
Thank you, Ann Cooper. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alyssa Demko. I'm an environmental scientist in the Chemical Evaluation Unit at Safer Consumer Products. I'll be sharing the rationale behind our proposal to list cleaning products containing hydrofluoric acid as a priority product. Next slide, please. Before I get into that, I first wanted to reiterate what the purpose of today's workshop is. Not only is it a time for us to explain the reasoning behind our proposal, but more importantly, today is designed for us to receive feedback from you. So if you are interested in this product chemical combination or potentially impacted by any regulatory action we might take, we definitely would like to hear from you today or through the written comment period. Next. So first, I want to talk a little bit about hydrofluoric acid. Hydrofluoric acid is also known as hydrogen fluoride, or HF, and is a small inorganic molecule composed of one hydrogen bonded to one fluoride, which is pictured here. Next, please. HF is acutely toxic through all routes of exposure. This includes inhalation, ingestion, dermal, and ocular contact. HF is a weak acid. What that means is that when it's in solution, it does not fully dissociate or separate. Rather, you will have some fluoride or F ions, some hydrogen or H ions, and then some of that bonded HF molecule together. And is in that bonded HF state that it can readily penetrate tissues. And that's what you're seeing depicted in the image on the bottom right, adapted from Opt-Ali et al. So in this figure, you can see fluoride or F ions are not too much of a concern in terms of penetrating tissue. Hydrogen ions are corrosive, so they will. But really what we're concerned about is that bonded HF molecule, because the hydrogen ion, when bonded to the fluoride ion, can essentially pull that fluoride ion through and into the tissues. And once within tissues, HF can destroy nerves, destroy tissue, eat away at bone, and it can dissociate and separate And the fluoride ions on their own can bind to critically important ions in our body, like calcium and magnesium, and this can then lead to systemic effects. Next. Additionally, exposure to dilute forms of hydrofluoric acid may not result in immediate pain or visible burns. This can in turn lead to more severe outcomes. What I mean by this is that some people might assume that if you get hydrofluoric acid on your skin, for instance, that you'll be aware of it. You might have redness or feel pain, but that is not necessarily the case with this acid. Exposure to dilute forms of hydrofluoric acid can have a delay in symptoms for up to and over 24 hours. And unfortunately, this is commonly reported in the literature that individuals are exposed, they're unaware, and they go about their day, and they essentially wake up the next day and their tissue may be black, for instance. And by that point, when they're getting treated, because they've been exposed for such a long period of time, that initial site of exposure can have more severe damage than if it was treated right away. And because the chemical has been in their system for longer, there's the chance for additional severe outcomes to occur. Next. So some severe outcomes that have been reported after exposure to hydrofluoric acid include painful burns and tissue loss, finger amputations, persistent pain in bones and nail beds, visual defects, blindness, loss of eyes, permanent damage to internal organs, respiratory diseases, and death. And it's important to note that severe outcomes listed here, including death, can occur after a single exposure. So this is not a chemical that requires chronic or long-term exposure or even repeated exposure. One exposure can result in a severe outcome, including death. Next, please. So now that I've talked a bit about hydrofluoric acid and our concerns around it as a chemical, I want to talk a bit about its presence in cleaning products. Historically, HF was used in cleaning products because it is corrosive by nature, and it is really good at removing tough stains like rust and brake dust. While many products no longer use it, it is still present in a subset or some cleaning products that are available. When we looked at cleaning products that contained hydrofluoric acid, we mainly found it in occupational products that were described as metal cleaning and brightening agents, rust removers, tile cleaners, wheel cleaners, and metal pickling solutions. And for those of you who are not aware and are curious, metal pickling solutions are a type of cleaning solution used in the cleaning and preparation of metals in specific industries. In addition to occupational products, we also came across the presence of HF in some cleaning products that were widely available to the general public through brick and mortar stores in California and online retailers. These products were mainly rust removers, but we did come across some other products like a swimming pool tile cleaner we saw through an online retailer and a metal cleaner that's available at a local auto body parts store. Next, please. Another important thing to note about the presence of hydrofluoric acid in cleaning products is that it can be found in products through the use of HF. So it may be listed as an ingredient, either hydrogen fluoride or hydrofluoric acid, but it can also be added into some of these products through the use of an HF releasing compound as the ingredient. A great example of this is ammonium bifluoride, which is also known as ammonium hydrogen difluoride. The reason this is sometimes used, or an HF releasing compound is used in place of HF, is because some of these HF releasing compounds come in the form of solids, whereas HF is typically handled in a liquid form. So when thinking about storage and transport and manufacturing, it may be considered relatively safer. But once that solid HF releasing compound is added into the product, it releases HF, so the same hazards are present as if HF was used directly. Next, please. So Ann Cooper previously mentioned that when we're thinking about listing product chemical combinations, we look at potential for exposure to the chemical and product, as well as the potential for adverse impacts to occur. I already listed and discussed some of the severe outcomes that are known to occur after exposure to hydrofluoric acid, but I wanted to take a few minutes to show you some other data we came across when we were trying to understand how widespread exposure and adverse impacts might be from these products. Next slide, please. So one of the main sources of data that we looked at was from poison control. And for those of you who are not aware, the National Poison Data System compiles information from poison control centers around the US, and they publish the results in an annual report. We decided to download the 5 most recently available reports, which were years 2018 to 2022, and aggregate those years together so we could get a sense of exposures and adverse impacts that occurred in a 5-year time span. What we found was that there were over 3,500 cases of exposure to hydrofluoric acid reported to poison control. There are a few things to note about this number. We do expect numbers from poison control to be underestimates because it requires calling and reporting to poison control, which not everybody does. The other thing to note is on these reports, the majority of exposures fall into one broad category that's described as exposures to hydrofluoric acid. So this includes both cleaning products as well as non-cleaning products, and it can include occupational settings as well as non-occupational settings. Separate from the broad category of hydrofluoric acid exposures, though, there are 2 other categories that include hydrofluoric acid that are on these reports, and that's rust removers with hydrofluoric acid and wheel cleaners with hydrofluoric acid. And we were curious about the comparison or the proportion of exposures coming from these products. So when we looked at that, we found that 22% of exposures were coming from rust removers and 5% from wheel cleaners. And just these 2 products together, that's a pretty sizable chunk of exposures. In terms of these reports, outcomes are reported in some cases, but not all. So for the cases that are known, 750 in those 5 years were defined as having serious outcomes. So these are moderate or major effects. You can think of these as prolonged, persistent injuries, potentially life-threatening. They can result in disability and disfigurement. Everything I mentioned before would fall into this category. Additionally, in this 5-year time span, there were 7 deaths, and more than half of those were associated with cleaning products. We can contribute the ones to cleaning products if they're from rust removers or wheel cleaners, since those are listed separately. And these reports also sometimes include additional information or case study examples. So we know that in this 5-year period, for instance, another one of those fatalities was from somebody consuming a concrete cleaning solution. So there is the possibility that more fatalities are the result of cleaning products, but we're just not sure because not all of them are described. So after we looked at the national data, we were curious about California specifically. So we reached out to California Poison Control, and they were kind enough to send us a report. Next, please. So the report that California Poison Control shared with us spanned the years 2014 to 2023, so about 9 years. And it is important to note that California shares its data with the National Poison Data System, so there is some overlap in these numbers. But since the years are not the same, we cannot proportionally look at California relative to the national data. Rather, we have to think about California separately. So based on the California report, we found that over 700 exposures to hydrofluoric acid were reported to California Poison Control, 16% from rust removers, and 7% from wheel cleaners. Of the cases where outcomes were reported, there were 97 that were found to be serious, and there were 5 deaths, with at least 2 being associated with cleaning products, and specifically rust removers or wheel cleaners. Next, please. In addition to looking at poison control data, we also looked at the scientific literature and medical case studies. We discuss it in a lot more detail in the profile, so I encourage you to read it. But I also wanted to mention that we came across multiple news articles related to exposures and adverse impacts to these types of products. I wanted to highlight 2 here just to show examples. So the article on the left is about a preschool boy in New York who drank a rust remover and died. And the speculation at the time was the shape and color of that rust remover's bottle resembled chocolate syrup, so the child may have thought it was that. The article on the right is about a 7-year-old girl in Florida who was playing hide and seek and knocked over a metal cleaner of her dad's, and she died as a result of the burns. These stories are, of course, tragic, and they also highlight that, again, it only takes one exposure for a severe outcome or fatality to occur. There are multiple routes of exposure that can be fatal, And not only the individuals who are purchasing and using these products might be exposed. For the ones that are widely available and may be found in individuals' households, other people may be interacting with these products as well. Next, please. So in addition to our concerns around exposure to the general public, we are also concerned about exposures and adverse impacts in occupational settings. And there's been quite a bit of work done on this in the literature. Again, I recommend you read our profile. We discuss a number of studies, but I wanted to highlight one here. So occupational exposures primarily result in burns from what we found, but there have also been hospitalizations and deaths as well. Similar to the poison control data, it is challenging to quantify the number of exposures and injuries because there are different reporting agencies people may call. So some individuals may call poison control, others may call OSHA or workman's comp. Some people report to multiple agencies, so there can be overlap in data, while other people may not report to anyone, so there's missing data. The study I'm highlighting here was done by Reed Whitaker and colleagues, and they specifically focused on Washington State from the years 2001 to 2013. And they just looked at commercial car and truck washing businesses, and they just looked at data that was reported to workman's comp. And what they reported in their publication was that there were 48 cases of exposure that were reported, 8 of which resulted in hospitalizations. And those are the 8 listed in the table here. You don't need to read all the details unless you're curious about the age of the individual and what specifically they were doing. What I mainly wanted to highlight was that the majority of these hospitalizations were related to burns of different severity. So that's what you're seeing in the column, second from the right. And unfortunately, there was also one fatality, and that was a case of accidental ingestion. Next. There were also additional concerns around exposure that I wanted to highlight. So given the nature of hydrofluoric acid, the fact that it's corrosive, it essentially can eat through a variety of materials, and it can penetrate skin, it is really important to use proper personal protective equipment, or PPE. And that is specialized, and it can be considered cumbersome in some cases. I wanted to note that there are multiple studies that discuss the use of PPE and exposures that occur despite that, including that Reed Whitaker et al. Study, which found that some individuals in those occupational settings were wearing protective equipment, but it may have been made from the wrong material. So for instance, there were instances of individuals wearing gloves, but those gloves did not protect from hydrofluoric acid and they were not aware. There were also instances where people were wearing the proper personal protective equipment, so the right materials and everything, but some type of failure occurred and they were exposed. Unfortunately, we also came across many examples of people not fully using proper personal protective equipment with these types of products. And I wanted to highlight that by showing 2 images we took from YouTube, which are pictured on the right. We are not endorsing either of these images or practices or videos. We just wanted to use them to show you some of what we found when we were researching this. So in addition to seeing that proper personal protective equipment is maybe not being used in these 2 images, we also wanted to highlight a few other points. You can see that these products are applied and used in different ways. So in some cases, people will pour the product on a surface and use a scrub brush. Other times, a power mister is used, like in the bottom image. Some of these products are also applied as pastes or used as soaking solutions. So depending on how they're used and applied, there can be different exposure route concerns. So different proper personal protective equipment might be needed depending on the scenario. The other thing I wanted to mention was that in terms of these products, it is pretty common to see them transferred into secondary containers, which we can see in both of these images. And as discussed in our profile, there is a study that was done by Ilg and colleagues, and they specifically looked at cases of ingestion of hydrofluoric acid. And they found that nearly 50% of the cases they looked at were because individuals transferred the product into a secondary container that was unlabeled, and then somebody consumed from that secondary container. So that is another concern of ours. Next, please. So in terms of populations that are impacted from these products, we wanted to mention our concern again for the general population, since some of these products are widely available in brick and mortar stores in California and through online retailers. Within the general population, there are certain sensitive subpopulations that may be exposed. This includes pregnant people and their fetuses, since these products may be in the house and people may interact with them while cleaning. And we also wanted to mention infants and children. I've already highlighted that there are cases of children that have been exposed and faced adverse impacts, including fatalities from these products. And unfortunately, we know that children do have the tendency to get into things that they shouldn't. So this is a concern of ours. Additionally, workers across many industries interact with these products and may face exposures. We discuss a number of industries within the profile. So again, I encourage you to read that and look at the references in there. But I wanted to specifically mention two groups. The first are those who are self-employed. The reason we wanted to highlight this group was because there is some evidence, which is cited in our profile, that indicates that self-employed workers may face greater exposures because there's less regulatory oversight in terms of their handling of hazardous materials. And for instance, when we were looking at exterior surface cleaning on YouTube, many of those individuals in those videos were individuals who were self-described as self-employed. Additionally, I wanted to mention house cleaners, because while many people in occupational settings may interact with one of these products repeatedly, house cleaners are a group that may come into contact with multiple products that contain HF during their job. So one can imagine a house cleaner using an exterior surface cleaner or a rust remover in the same day that they use a textile cleaner or another type of cleaner with HF in it. Additionally, the literature cited on this study and discussed in our report indicates that about 81% of professional house cleaners in California are Latina women. This means that Latina women may face disproportionate exposure to these types of products. Next, please. So what about alternatives to HF? Well, thankfully, alternatives are readily available. In fact, the market has seemingly shifted away from HF-based products. So if you go into many brick and mortar stores in California, the majority of the shelves will not contain these products. If you find them, they may be proportionally in much lower numbers than the alternatives that are available. Additionally, I wanted to highlight that besides having a wide variety of alternatives out there, the alternatives all don't rely on the same ingredients. There are a number of chemicals that are used in place of the function of hydrofluoric acid in these types of products. I provided some examples here. We saw a lot of other acids, so for example, citric acid and oxalic acid, but we also came across a wide number of cleaners that were described as non-acid-based cleaners, and frequently they were described as proprietary, but that was not associated with just one brand or one manufacturer. We saw this frequently, and in many cases, the chemicals were not listed because they were just described as non-hazardous. Additionally, all the different kind of subcategories of cleaning products we looked at, we found alternatives for. So I'm just scratching the surface here. We have a section in the profile that discusses more examples of alternatives. And if you know of more, please let us know through the written comment period, because that would definitely be helpful to add to it, because it seemed like there's just a wealth of alternatives out there, so we may not have captured everything. The other thing I wanted to mention was that for many of the products that contain hydrofluoric acid, we found that the manufacturers were already making and selling alternatives. So the capability to use these alternative ingredients is there. It just seems that some of the products have maybe never made that shift over and away from HF. Next, please. So finally, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the potential for regulatory response. Recently, the California Health and Safety Code was expanded, and we now have the ability to go straight to regulatory response. We sometimes refer to this as SB 502. To remind you of the 4 steps in our process that Ann Cooper went through, they're listed on the left. Going straight to regulatory response essentially means that we would go from step 2, so the rulemaking and having a priority product, straight to regulatory response, and we would skip over that 3rd step of alternative analysis. We could do this in very particular cases where certain criteria are met. This includes having alternatives available, and those alternatives need to meet certain criteria. They need to be feasible, for instance. Additionally, there needs to be publications that highlight the use of these alternatives. We believe that this criteria is met for cleaning products containing hydrofluoric acid, so this is something we are considering. Since it is a new authority and we have not done it before, we wanted to bring it up today in case anybody had feedback in regards to this specifically. If you think, for instance, this is a good candidate of a product chemical combination that should go straight to regulatory response, that would be helpful to know. On the other hand, if you have concerns around this and think you know of a product that really would need an alternative analysis, that is also helpful to know. In terms of our regulatory response options, I've listed them here, and these are true if we go through the 4 steps of the process or if we go straight to regulatory response. There are varied regulatory response options we can take. This includes everything from asking for additional information and safety measures to doing sales restrictions or prohibitions, end-of-life product stewardship, and even doing research funding. Again, if you have thoughts around regulatory response options, if you feel strongly that one of these is a good candidate, if we decide to move forward, that would be helpful to know. If you have concerns around particular ones, that would also be helpful to know. Next, please. So in terms of where we are in the process, our profile came out on October 31st. You can find it on our website, and the link has been dropped into the chat a few times now, I think. We also have an open comment period that has been mentioned. It goes through December 19th. We highly encourage you to submit feedback either verbally today or through that written comment period. As has been mentioned a few times, we really rely on feedback from those who are interested or impacted by these product chemical combinations to let us know if we missed information, if we maybe misunderstood something, if you know of an example of something where maybe an alternative doesn't work for some reason, or if we missed alternatives and there's additional information out there. All of that information is incredibly helpful for us to make sure we make the right decisions moving forward. We will incorporate the feedback from the comment period, and we'll also go through an external scientific peer review process, and we'll incorporate feedback from that as well. Based on our timeline, we plan to initiate rulemaking in the summer of 2025. Next, please. With that, I want to thank you all for tuning in today and listening. I also want to acknowledge everyone at the Safer Consumer Products Program, especially Lizette Romano, Shukla Roy Semen, Kyle Harris, and Ann Cooper Doherty, who were instrumental in the construction of the profile as well as the talk today. And I want to highlight and thank everybody else who's listed here for their valuable feedback throughout this process. Next, please. So once again, if you want to submit a written comment, you can do that through our CalSafer portal. The URL is available here as well as a QR code. For questions, we will have a Q&A session, and we're happy to try and answer them today. But if you want to supply a written question, feel free to email us at saferconsumerproducts@dtsc.ca.gov. Additionally, if you want to stay up to date on not only this project, but other things we are working on, I encourage you to sign up for our mailing list. We will drop a link in the chat. That is a great place where you will get notified of any upcoming events, workshops, comment periods, everything else we might be working on. So I really encourage you to sign up for that. And with that, I will pass it back to Charlie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, as well as Ann Doherty and Deputy Christensen for the excellent information. So those that have joined us late, we will now go into our question and answer session regarding DTSC's presentation. If you have a question, please click on the Q&A button, or if you prefer to speak your question, press the raised hand button at the bottom of your screen in the toolbar. We will do our best to respond to questions in the order that we receive them, but keep in mind we will not be using the chat function. We ask that you send only one question at a time so everyone has the opportunity to get their questions answered. If you are joining by phone, a couple options, please email your questions to Safer Consumer Products, saferconsumerproducts@dtsc.ca.gov, or press *9 to raise your hand to let us know you have a question. You will be called on and prompted to unmute yourself. Let's get into it. At this time, I don't see any questions come up, but typically it takes a few moments here for people in the audience to type out and kind of think of a question. So we'll give some time here. Everyone's day has been going well. first question came in. I'm going to go ahead and read it from Michael Zahn. Hopefully I said your last name right. Will the scope be limited to a quantity, package size, or selling size, or otherwise?
I can answer that. Thank you for your question. To my understanding, we don't typically limit based on quantity. If somebody else wants to jump in and correct me, but typically in the past we have not. So I would say no, we don't limit it to quantity.
Thank you for your response, Alyssa. No other questions at this time. Let's give a couple minutes here, a couple moments for people to type out some questions. Don't be shy. No other questions. I know sometimes when we give a little bit more time, just people thinking about what to ask. So in the meantime, if you can't think of on any questions right now, you are welcome to utilize some of the links that Lizette has provided in the chat, for the regulatory response, the comments to submit through CalSafer. There's the email in there as well. Sign up for the electronic mailing list. The profile for the hydrofluoric cleaning products profile is there as well. Another question came in from Danielle Kuchera. Any thoughts on the environmental effects of hydrofluoric acid?
I can take that. Thank you for the question. We do discuss some items related to environmental fate, for instance, within the profile. I know we didn't touch on it today because I essentially just did the very high level highlights of the profile. So I encourage you to read that. In terms of our concern, I would say we focused on thinking about the use phase and how people interact with it as opposed to the environmental impacts. But for additional information, I would recommend you read the profile. I don't know if anybody else on the team wants to jump in and specifically comment on environmental effects. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you for that. Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah, definitely take a look at that profile. A lot of great information in there that might be able to answer that for you. Q&A is showing up blank right now. Again, let's give it a couple moments here. If you want to speak your question, you can also press that raise hand button. If you're calling in by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. No questions at this time, it looks like. I can send out another reminder to visit the SCP website listed in the chat. Definitely a great resource for all things SCP and providing especially for this workshop and hydrofluoric acid. Anything else SCP related is also on there. Okay, still no more questions. No questions at this time. Get a couple more seconds here. Hopefully somebody's just kind of thinking of a difficult question here. I'm just taking some time to type it out. Okay. All right, at this time, I guess with no more questions, we'll go ahead and conclude our Q&A session on DTSC's presentation. We can move forward here to our public comment session of the presentation. Thank you for that. Moving to the next slide. As mentioned earlier, the public comment period is currently active, and the deadline to provide comments is 11:59 p.m. on December 19th, 2024. Next slide, please. So I will go ahead and read through each public comment for record. As mentioned earlier, the panel will not be responding directly to comments in this workshop. We appreciate all feedback and will be recording and compiling them, as well as considering them. As a reminder, we will not be using the chat function. Please submit comments through the Q&A button or raised hand function at the bottom of your screen. You can also email your comments to Safer Consumer Products, SAFER CONSUMERPRODUCTS at dtsc.ca.gov or via our CalSafer website. Those links are in the chat at this time. Those joining by phone, you can use email, the QR code link, or press *9 to raise your hand to let us know you have a comment. You will be prompted to unmute yourself. So let's get into it. I don't see any comments at this time, but just give us some time to give everyone some time to type that out. I want to thank all our attendees today for taking time out of your day and scheduling, this time to join us for our workshop today. I'm sure everyone has a busy schedule, so really appreciate you in being involved and participating. For those that might have missed it earlier, in the chat box, wealth of information in there, link to the hydrofluoric acid profile, link to the CalSafer website to submit comments, SCP website for more information, the regulatory response, the email to submit your comments is in there as well. Electronic mailing list is also there as well. So definitely take advantage of that, of all those resources. Still don't see any comments come through at this time. Give it another couple moments here. Okay. Still not seeing any comments come through. Let's give it a couple more seconds here. Okay, all right. No other comments at this time. So let's go ahead and conclude our public comment session. Thank you again, everyone. This concludes the public comment session as well as our presentation for today. Thank you for your interest and for participating. I'll go ahead and pass it off to Robin for closing remarks. Robin?
Thank you again, Charlie. And I really want to thank both Ann Cooper and Alyssa for providing today's presentations. And big thanks to you, Charlie, and to the team for taking care of everything for us in terms of managing and coordinating slides and questions. For our audience, we are very open to your questions and your comments. We value them tremendously, and we rely on your input to get our regulations right. So if you do have thoughts and information that you think that we should consider, please submit them through our CalSafer portal. Please submit these comments no later than the December 19th, 2024 deadline. And I really want to thank everybody for joining us here today. And we look forward to taking your input under consideration. And we will be looking forward to moving this process forward in the next couple of months. I'm going to thank everybody again, and I'll turn it back over to you, Charlie.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you to our panel. Again, thank you to our audience. And I hope everyone has a good, wonderful rest of their day. Thank you.